Now to an incredible find overseas, an elaborate series of stone monuments believed to have been hidden for thousands of years, not far from the famous site of Stonehenge.
Now, a new analysis shows that the 6-ton iconic altar stone at the heart of Stonehenge originated from northeastern Scotland.
For 5,000 years, Stonehenge has sat on the Salisbury Plain, refusing to fully explain itself. Every generation that studied it walked away with a theory, and none of those theories ever quite settled the argument. So, in 2026, a team of researchers tried something different. Instead of adding one more guess to the pile, they fed the entire site, every scan, every survey, every measurement ever recorded, into an artificial intelligence system and asked it to find whatever 3 centuries of human eyes had missed. What came back did not describe a monument raised by simple farmers with stone tools and good intentions. It described something far more deliberate, far more precise, and, if the analysis holds up, far older in its knowledge than anyone currently studying the site is prepared to explain. Start with the basic physical problem, because it is worth sitting with before anything else. Stonehenge stands on flat, open chalk downland about 90 miles southwest of London. And it has bothered visitors for centuries, not because of what it looks like, but because of what it implies. The outer ring is built from massive sarsen stones, each one standing over 20 feet tall and weighing around 25 tons, hauled from the Marlborough Downs roughly 20 miles to the north. These stones are capped with horizontal lintels locked into place using mortise and tenon and tongue-and-groove joints, the same joinery techniques you would expect to find in fine woodworking, except carved here into solid rock by people who, as far as the archaeological record shows, had no metal tools to cut with. Inside that outer ring sit the smaller bluestones, each still weighing up to 4 tons, and those came from the Preseli Hills of Wales, roughly 140 miles away. No wheels capable of bearing that load, no draft animals suited to the terrain, no metal, and no cranes. Even today, with hydraulics and steel and train crews, moving a single 25-ton, precisely shaped stone is not trivial. The textbook explanation has always leaned on log rollers, rope, packed earthen ramps, and an enormous amount of patient trial and error. And that explanation has never quite carried the full weight of what actually stands on that plain. For most of recorded history, in fact, nobody even credited ordinary people with building it. Medieval chroniclers attributed the monument to Merlin, to giants, to anyone larger than life, because the structure simply looked too advanced for the people known to have lived on that plain at the time. That assumption only fell away once radiocarbon dating pinned down the real construction period. And once it did, the giants were quietly retired and the credit was handed back to Neolithic farmers. What the 2026 analysis does, uncomfortably, is bring back some of that old unease, not by resurrecting giants, but by suggesting that whoever actually built this had capabilities modern archaeology has consistently underestimated. And the construction was not a single burst of ambition. It unfolded in phases across roughly 3,000 years, beginning with a circular ditch and bank, followed by a ring of 56 mysterious pits, now known as the Aubrey Holes, then the raising of the towering sarsen trilithons, then the repeated repositioning of the bluestones into arrangements that still are not fully explained, and finally, around 1600 BCE, the site was deliberately shut down. Not abandoned in a hurry. Shut down. That distinction turns out to matter a great deal by the end of the story. The 2026 research effort assembled the most complete Stonehenge dataset ever compiled. Every measurement, every geological scan, every astronomical calculation performed on the site across 300 years of scholarship. An amount of data no single researcher could hold in their head at once. Each generation of archaeologists had measured the site with whatever tools were available to them, argued with the generation before, and left behind records that were never fully cross-referenced against everything else. All of that went into an AI system trained across physics, engineering, astronomy, and archaeological pattern recognition, with instructions that were almost embarrassingly simple. Look at everything, and report only what the numbers themselves demanded, without favoring any existing theory. The AI did not start where a human would. A person walks up to Stonehenge and looks at the standing stones first, because the stones are the obvious centerpiece. The system instead started with the Aubrey holes, the 56 pits set in a ring just inside the earthwork, first noted back in the 17th century and largely dismissed ever since as background features, holding a few cremated remains here and there, their uneven spacing chalked up to imprecise Neolithic labor. The AI measured the spacing between all 56 holes down to fractions of a millimeter and plotted the distances around the full circle. The random scatter everyone had assumed would be there was not there. Instead, the spacing traced a clean, repeating wave, and that wave matched almost exactly the mathematical curve describing how the moon's orbit shifts across its 18.6-year nodal cycle. The astronomer brought in to verify the finding described the correlation as statistically overwhelming, with the odds of it occurring by chance effectively zero. This was not a lucky sight line visible on one good night. This was orbital mechanics translated into physical spacing, accurate to fractions of a centimeter, laid out around a ring roughly 100 meters wide, by people working more than 3,000 years before Kepler formally described planetary motion in writing. The number 56 itself turned out to be deliberate too. 3 times 18.6 comes out to 55.8, which rounds to 56. The ring was not a burial ground with odd spacing. It was a triple-cycle lunar tracking device. 56 years of sky recorded in the ground. Reaching that level of precision was not a weekend project. Tracing the moon's full swing required watching its rising and setting points across nearly 2 decades. Checking each new observation against records kept by people who had died before the pattern was even complete. That kind of continuity does not come from one observer. It comes from a chain of people passing careful measurements down across most of a lifetime before the first pit was ever dug. And once cut into the chalk, the calculation kept working without anyone tending it. Correct today, exactly as it was 5,000 years ago, waiting for someone with the right tools to notice it was never accidental. From there, the analysis turned to the standing stones themselves. And this is where the story shifts from calendar keeping into something stranger. Using every measurement of the sarsen stones, their positions, heights, orientations, density, and the exact seating of each lintel, the system ran acoustic simulations of the monument as it would have stood when complete. The result: Stonehenge behaves like a tuned resonant chamber, a three-dimensional space engineered to shape sound. Its geometry forces standing waves at specific frequencies, and the strongest of these fall in the infrasound range, roughly between 95 and 120 Hz, well below the threshold of conscious human hearing. Modern research has linked infrasound in that exact range to altered states of consciousness, intense emotional responses, and even visual hallucinations, along with measurable physiological effects like shifts in heart rate. The acoustic engineer who validated the simulation expected to find the flaw that would explain the pattern away, and instead watched a precise, repeatable standing wave map appear, the kind of targeted acoustic engineering that today requires computer modeling and specialized equipment, apparently achieved here with a ranged rock. And the effect was not incidental. It repeated across different sound sources, always landing in the same frequency band, always concentrating at the same fixed points on the floor of the circle. Those fixed points turned out to align, when checked against the excavation record, with the locations where cremated human remains have actually been found on the site. Random placement would not explain that overlap. The remains cluster precisely where the simulation shows the acoustic effect peaking, suggesting that whoever built this structure understood exactly where the force gathered and chose those spots deliberately, whether for the most honored dead, the most important ritual moments, or something else the data cannot specify. That same acoustic logic finally offers an answer to a question archaeologists have argued over for decades. Why haul bluestones nearly 140 miles from a specific site in Wales when comparable stone existed far closer? The mineral analysis shows these stones were selected for how they resonate. Struck, a bluestone rings with a clear, sustained tone, and different stones ring at different pitches, depending on their size, shape, and mineral content. Rather than being gathered at random, the stones appear to have been chosen to form a harmonic series, a set of tones locked together by mathematical intervals recognizable as a pentatonic scale, the same 5-note structure, that shows up independently in musical traditions across unconnected cultures worldwide. Someone doing the selecting had to have an ear for pitch, standing in a Welsh quarry, striking slabs, and keeping only the ones that fit the intended chord. Each surviving bluestone appears to sit at a specific acoustic node relative to the sarsen ring, so that when the larger ring produces its low infrasound resonance, the bluestones vibrate in sympathy, adding harmonic layers on top of the fundamental tone. The entire system was tuned before a single stone was ever moved into final position. Put together, the lunar calculator, the acoustic chamber, and the tuned bluestones point to one conclusion. This was designed as a single integrated system from the outset, not assembled piecemeal by successive generations, improvising as they went. And a design like that implies someone somewhere already understood how stone carries sound, how the moon moves through its long cycle, and how a resonant structure affects the human body. Knowledge with no clear point of origin in the existing archaeological record. That question, where such knowledge came from, led the researchers to widen their view beyond the monument itself. And the picture changed again. Using LiDAR surveys, geophysical data, and archaeological records covering several square miles around the site, the analysis revealed that Stonehenge is not an isolated structure at all, but the centerpiece of a much larger coordinated landscape. Hundreds of burial mounds, ceremonial avenues, timber circles, and earthworks connected by precise geometric and astronomical relationships. Invisible from ground level, but unmistakable once mapped as a whole. Burial mounds form deliberate triangles with the monument at their apex. Earthworks run in straight lines for miles. Timber circles mark specific celestial events when sighted from the center of the ring. None of this happens by natural accident. It requires builders capable of fixing a point on land they could not directly see and trusting the geometry to land exactly where intended. An order of surveying precision more commonly associated with classical civilizations 2,500 years later. Even more unsettling, some of the earthworks tied into this larger geometric plan were built between 3500 and 3000 BCE, hundreds of years before the sarsen circle itself went up. The landscape blueprint existed first. Stonehenge was added into a plan that already predated it, meaning the original design had to be carried forward accurately across 20 to 25 generations with no written language to preserve it, a span of transmission longer and more precise than anything documented in the study of oral tradition, where even the steadiest recitations tend to drift measurably over centuries. The most unsettling finding, though, concerns not the plan, but its execution over time. Rather than improving as generations passed, and, as you would expect from a culture refining a shared technique, the precision of the stonework declined. The earliest arrangements show the deepest understanding of the acoustics. Later stones drift further and further from the ideal position, with average errors growing roughly fourfold between the earliest and latest work. This is not a civilization steadily mastering a craft. It looks like a civilization slowly losing its grip on knowledge it once held completely, each generation copying the work of the one before with a little less understanding of why it mattered, the way a song can survive being passed down long after its original meaning has faded. That pattern of decline runs straight through to the monument's final days. Around 1600 BCE, the evidence does not point to abandonment in panic or simple neglect. Fallen stones were laid down with apparent care. Certain features were deliberately covered with earth, seemingly to protect them from erosion. The site appears to have been closed deliberately by people who could no longer maintain the full system, but wanted it preserved intact for whoever came after them, on the chance that a future generation might eventually understand what they themselves had struggled to hold on to. Which leaves us 5,000 years later, in the strange position of being exactly the audience those final builders may have been hoping for, a civilization equipped, at last, with the tools to read back what was sealed into the ground long ago. The mathematics is there. The astronomy is there. The acoustics are documented and repeatable. What remains genuinely unresolved is where this knowledge originated in the first place, and how much of it had already been lost by the time the last stones were finally set into place.